This is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast from my home on the beach in Acapulco, Mexico. I have our second guest, our first returning guest of Anarchast, David Giessel. I forget which episode he was. I think it was 15 or 13 or something. I don't know.
Something like that.
Something like that. He was in the teens, and he came down here to Acapulco, and he lives in Fairbanks, Alaska, and he wanted to check out what's going on down here, and very happy to have him here. And how have you been enjoying your time here?
It's been really good. I came down with my buddy Josh Luther,
who's in the episode before you on Anarchast.
Yeah, he's my translator, so he's kept me out of trouble. And neither of us really knew what to expect. We've read your blogs on Dollar Vigilante and read some stuff about Acapulco, but we weren't really sure what we would see when we got here. And
yeah, you never are. That's one of the things. Sorry to cut you off, but that's one of the things that I always hear. And it's always one of the things I used to think as well. Before I did so many things I've traveled the world, I've sailed a boat, halfway around the world. I always used to think, what's it going to be like? And you can read so much on the internet, but you never know until you go there. You never do, because no one sees the world the way you do. And so it's so important to come and see it with your own eyes.
Definitely, yeah. And you kind of get a feeling, kind of an intuition. Is this place cool? Is this place someplace I wouldn't want to be? Things like that. So like our first night here, we got to our hotel maybe 8 or 9, and we were just out hanging out, and stuff didn't close. It was 1,
Shocking.
It was 2, yeah. And
well, when it closes, they close when the last person leaves, which is the way it should be.
Yeah, and everybody's laid back about life. I mean, there's no time, there's no rush. There's Mexican time down here,
That's right. Well, that's the thing is, I'm from Canada, you're from the US, and what they do is there's these closing times, and it's like 1:30 or 2 o'clock, you get the call. And first of all, in the US, you can't even drink alcohol until you're 21 years old, which is absolutely unbelievable.
Right.
And then you go to these bars, and then at 1:30, after drinking for an hour or two, they go, last call for alcohol, and people just start downing drinks. And then they shove them all out in the street at the same time. A bunch of really drunk people who are very frustrated and angry.
Yeah.
So you can see how it works in a more freer market, and it's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, the businesses can do what they want, and nobody shoots anything down here. They just sip on a mixed drink and have a good time.
Yeah, no one really gets all that drunk because they're not in a rush.
Yeah.
It's natural.
Right, and it totally works.
Freedom works. Who knew it?
Yeah, who knew? And, and like the traffic lights. We're in the cab on the way from the bus station to the condo, and the traffic lights are kind of advisory, right? But it works. We got there fine. We haven't actually seen any wrecks, I don't think.
No, a lot of Americans come down and they say, "Oh, this is terrible. What's the speed limit?" And I'll say, "There is no speed limits." And they'll go, "Let's book the next flight home. This is crazy." But that's freedom.
Right.
You go as fast as you want. Just don't hit anyone. If you hit anyone, then you have to deal with the consequences, which is the way it works in natural life. But actually, it works way better. Every time I go back to the U.S. or Canada, I see car accidents all over the place, and it's because there's like 1,000 rules. And most people are kind of stupid, especially when they're from Canada to the U.S. They go to public schools. They're not taught how to think or anything, and they can't actually adhere to these thousands of rules, and that's what happens. And many people come here as well, and they go, or I'll say to them, "There's no such thing as road rage here," and they'll be like, "What? That's just normal where I'm from." Well, road rage comes from these people and all these rules, and then when someone doesn't adhere to all the rules, other people start going crazy. So a slave on slave mentality. That slave didn't adhere to all the rules. Honk, honk, I'm gonna kill you. Down here, it's just have fun and just don't hit anyone.
Yeah, with all the rules, you get this mentality, how dare he get away with that? How dare somebody get away with speeding, right? And you call in the cops, and like, this guy was speeding,
call
here's
the
his
government.
license plate number. Yeah, he didn't do any damage to anybody. It was 3 a.m., there was nobody on the road, but he was breaking the law. And yeah, here you don't, just that mentality doesn't even exist.
That's right.
Josh and I hung out with these guys. We met these 4 guys at Paradise, which is like the place you go to meet people.
Right over there,
yeah,
bungee
right over
jump.
there.
Bungee jump inside of a disco.
Yeah, you can bungee jump into the bar, which is pretty sweet.
Pretty hard to get a permit for that in the U.S. as far as I know.
Right. And we were hanging out with them, and we got talking about like the book group and the discussion group I had back in Fairbanks. And they're like, "Well, what do you talk about?" It's like, "Well, we talk about anarchy." And the guy was like, what do you mean, anarchy? And so we kind of tried to explain it. He's like, oh, anarchy, you mean freedom. And it was like, yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
Whereas
they
in the
understand
States,
it so simply here.
right, the absence of, authoritarian rule, the absence of the boot on your throat is
They
freedom.
don't know the word anarchy, but they definitely know the word freedom.
Right. And, in the States, you talk about anarchy, you talk about, not organizing society around systemic violence. And people go, oh, you mean chaos? It's like, no, not at all. I mean, there's an immense amount of order here, even though there's no rules. That's another thing that Josh and I have observed. The restaurants, the vendors on the beach, the traffic, everything works out. There's no closing time, but people go where they want. They get home at
All
night.
drugs are legal, despite what most
Right.
Americans think.
That was another thing. These guys we hung out with, they were between 20 and 22. There were 4 of them. None of them had done anything. They hadn't smoked weed. They hadn't done cocaine. They hadn't done heroin. Blah blah blah. And it's all available. And they, we asked them, well, you don't feel a need to do that? And they're like, no, there's plenty of time to do that whenever. Whenever I feel like, and I don't feel like doing it now. And so, again, this in America, there's this belief that people don't know how to take care of themselves.
Well,
People
what
don't know how to
happens
make
in the
decisions for
U.S.
themselves.
is everyone's so oppressed. I know it is, like, every time I go back to the U.S., I'm searching for any kind of drug just to get through my few days I'm there. It's like
TSA rage, among other
yes,
things.
I start getting raped, irradiated. People are shouting at me. I'm getting threatened to pepper spray. I end up in handcuffs often, and I'm just like, give me anything to get me through the next few days. So I can only imagine what it's like to actually live there.
Right. I mean, the drugs are. The reason to do drugs, or a big reason to do drugs in the States, is to escape reality,
Yes.
right? But if you're in a reality that's really nice, that's relaxed, where you can get what you want, where people are easygoing, you're not chasing an escape. Whereas, in the States,
That's
it's
right.
like, everything here sucks.
Yeah.
So where am I going to get my next fix from?
Yeah, in many ways, the U.S. government is a self-licking ice cream cone, right? Because they create the problems that they say they're there to prevent.
Oh, yeah.
So they create people wanting and needing all kinds of drugs and things just to get through their day. And then a bunch of people start getting on all these things and crashing their cars and stuff. And then they go, well, we're here to protect you from them. We're going to put them in cages, which just makes it worse, because then your father, there's millions of people in cages in the U.S. So then so many people's fathers are in cages. So then the kids grow up and they don't have a father, and then they're on welfare. And like, it's a self-licking ice cream cone.
Yeah.
And it just gets worse and worse until it basically destroys itself, which is probably going to happen fairly soon, in my opinion.
Yeah. And people aren't ready for it there. Here,
not at all.
That's another thing here. People transact in cash very heavily. And we asked these guys we were hanging out with, it was like, what's the deal with the cash thing? Is it just convenient, or people don't have bank cards? And they said, no, nobody here wants to pay taxes. Taxes suck. Yeah. So we transact in cash, and we don't report, what we're supposed to report.
That's another thing as well, is they had their currency collapse in 1997 with the peso collapse. So many people ask me, oh, you live in Mexico, isn't that, because I talk a lot about the coming fiat currency collapse. All fiat currencies are going to collapse. And people say, well, isn't Mexico just as dangerous as the US for this type of collapse? No, because they've all gone through it. You talk to anyone here, and they remember about, 15 years ago, the currency collapse, and they remember it was difficult and it was hard, and there was definitely a period of time where it was survival mode, but most people here have gotten through that now, and they don't trust the government, they don't trust the currency system. A good friend of mine, Hugo Salinas Price, who's a billionaire who lives just right over there in a villa, not to point the exact villa out, I don't want the US government to send in a drone, is trying to bring back silver as a currency here in Mexico for those exact reasons. It's really amazing, when you think about it, especially from the American point of view. If you watch the US News, Brian Williams on NBC News, you think Mexico is terrible. So many people go on TV and they go, Mexico is a failed state. And I laugh because they say that like it's a bad thing.
Right. The state has failed. Oh, horrors.
Yeah,
right? People are
look at
now.
how terrible it is.
Yeah.
And so that's why they really go after it on the media, and they try to make it look as dangerous as possible. Travel alerts, terrorist alerts, because they don't want Americans to know what's going on, because the Americans will come down, they'll be like yourself, and they'll see this for themselves, and they'll open their eyes a little bit.
Yeah, after our second day here, Josh went online and started looking up the statistics for crime in Acapulco and this state and this region of Mexico. And he's like, oh, we're in the most violent, crime-ridden part of Mexico.
This is one of the most violent places on earth, according to the news.
Yeah, and It's like, oh, good thing we know now. Now we can be terrified
Yes.
when we're out just hanging out.
You better get the next
with cool
flight out.
people. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, the worst thing that's happened to us is a cabbie charged us like a couple bucks more than he would a local. And it's like, okay, $2, $3, whatever.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's truly unbelievable, all the propaganda, all the stigma. And so you've been on now for a few times. You have a radio show in Alaska, the Patriots Lament.
Yeah, and I actually called in last week and I called in this week. And last week I called in and I talked about our little checkpoint deal.
Oh, right.
They have armed checkpoints here.
Funded by the U.S. government.
Funded by the U.S. government. Yeah, all the police cars here. All the police cars here are Dodge Chargers.
Yes. Oh, yes.
All the helicopters are U.S. Manufacturer.
Yes.
Anyway, so there's these checkpoints where there's these guys with guns sitting in a U.S. made, an AM General Hummer, right? Of course.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to stop or slow down a bunch, and we rolled one of them. And so these guys standing there with guns, literally. And I asked on the radio show, I was like, do you know what happened when we rolled the checkpoint? And there's silence. And I was like, nothing, a resounding nothing. In the U.S., if you roll a checkpoint, I mean, yeah, who knows what's going to happen?
I couldn't imagine what would happen. I know here personally, I've rolled through on my scooter, drunk, no helmet, no license, no registration, nothing. They'll sometimes, every now and then, they'll kind of do this, like stop, which this means slow down or stop in Mexico, right. And I'll just be like this, and I'll just keep going, and I look in the rearview mirror, and they'll just be kind of like confused, like,
yeah.
Oh, that was interesting. He didn't stop. Because they don't really know. They're just getting paid by the U.S. government. They get all their guns. They're happy. They're like, hey, I've got a job and a big gun, so some girls think I'm cool now. But they don't really buy into all this stuff. It's really, it's really funny.
Yeah, that's another thing, talking to the locals, the whole drug war thing. They understand exactly the consequence. They understand the cause. They understand it's a U.S. government, ruse, basically.
Yes.
And they understand that all the violence here is a direct result of that. And so that's really interesting, because people in the U.S. just can't fathom that. They don't get it.
No.
On the radio show today when I called in, there were a couple callers before me who were talking about, we got to get Ron Paul on a third-party ticket because he's not going to get the Republican nomination, and this is how we're going to be free. And I pointed out to them that the only leader that they need is the person they see in the mirror every morning, right? The only way they're going to be free is when they realize that they're in control of their own life. And that introduces, a certain degree of responsibility that people in the U.S. aren't willing to take on. And it seems like people here, for better or for worse, mostly for better, have that figured out, right? That their life is their own domain. They're not looking to the state.
No.
And they don't complain. They don't say, oh, my check didn't show up, or the Social Security system will take care of my grandparents, or anything like that. It's just a different way of thinking.
Yeah.
The schools down here too. It's if you send your kid to public school, it's viewed as a negative thing.
Yeah.
You're supposed to send your kid to private school if you care about your kid.
Yes.
And in the States, nobody thinks that way. They go, our public schools suck. We need more money for them.
Right.
I need to point guns at my neighbor and steal more property tax.
Yes.
So that,
And that's always the answer with government, right?
Yeah.
They always fail, and the answer is always they just need more money. It's the exact opposite of free enterprise.
Right. Yeah, the market signals are flipped.
Right.
Right.
Everything about government, they flip it. Government is, by its nature, communism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. Which takes us to another interesting point. The best example of socialism, I think, in the history of the world is probably the U.S. military. It's actually the ideal socialist structure because you've externalized all your costs, right? You have 300 million schmucks, basically, who fund a few guys to live in a socialist housing compound, have their meals paid for them, they get their clothes given to them, they have their orders given to them, like their entire life is planned out. It's an absolutely planned economy. And the only reason
military is right-wing welfare.
Sure, absolutely, right, yeah, you brought that up the other night.
Yeah.
And it's like the perfect socialist system because you can pilfer from a much larger group of economically productive people to fund your little socialist experiment. If you had to fund it internally, it would fall apart very quickly.
Yes.
And there's a buddy of mine in California, actually, who he had a meeting with some guys from the Navy, and they were talking about a feature they needed on this product he was supposed to make for them. And he asked them, they were worried about when they come under fire, they need to be able to, get out, and so they need this extra feature. And he said, why why are you there? Aren't you expecting to come under fire? And they're like, well, I don't know. And so he proposed to them, he said, why don't you seek gainful employment? You know, why don't you resign and seek gainful employment? And that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
The military, the government is a parasite on the economy. It's necessarily that. And it only exists to the extent that there's, you know, a host to feed it. So
it's truly unbelievable because in the U.S. you have most of the people most of the citizenry actually own firearms, which is great.
Right.
And then up north you have the great enemy, the Canadians, who are always threatening to invade. And down south you have all these terrible Mexicans who are threatening to invade. So you, of course, need this $1 trillion military that spends more than any other government on Earth combined. And then on to the west and to the east, you have giant oceans, which, of course, are so easy for people to get in. The Iranians just want to get in there and just take over.
yeah, with all the big boats that they have.
Yeah,
right?
so you know, 1 or 2 little fishing boats that they have.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, so you have this $1 trillion military, you have all these troops who have been brainwashed by, you know, the church, the state, and their families into thinking that they're serving the highest cause. And the social meme, right, is that they're defending freedom. So in Mexico, you have, I mean, what's the military budget here? You know, a few $1 million a year.
It's paid by the U.S. government.
Right, it's paid by the U.S. government. There's no military. I mean, there's a little naval base down there that's like a pier with a little dinghy or something.
Yes.
And people here are much more free in their everyday lives.
Yes.
Their ability to make decisions concerning their life is much broader than in the U.S. So if $1 trillion military and all these troops dying and fighting these wars overseas is what makes Americans free, then how can Mexicans be free with none of that? That's an interesting question. I would like to have that answered.
Well, the answer is it's the opposite. By
Sure.
spending money, taking money from people and spending it on this right-wing welfare system, it's the antithesis of freedom.
Right. And the way that can get switched around and that so many people can buy into that is just, it's mind-boggling.
It's brainwashing. And I'm so glad you came down to Mexico so you can see more what your instincts were telling you, because I know talking to you up in Alaska, you knew a lot of stuff, but it's coming here, I think you see it a bit more. Is that correct?
Yeah, if you're here, you can actually internalize, you know, what it's really like. Yeah. So I'm gonna write up a blog for you guys on my experience here. I have some notes, and
that's great.
Hopefully, other people come down and visit.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you again. It's our second-time guest, David Giessel, and I know you're moving to the USS Canada soon. You're getting out of one communist country, going to another one, but you're getting closer and closer to escaping.
Yeah, I mean, at least Canada's a different jurisdiction. They can't play me quite as poorly as the U.S. until I get citizenship.
That's right. You're never as enslaved as you are when you're a citizen.
Right. So once you leave your home farm,
that's right.
The farmer has less control over you.
That's right. So you're a little bit freer now when you go into Canada, and hopefully you get down here, whether to Mexico or anywhere else outside of the U.S., Canada, all these control police states. And, great to have you down here.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Thank you very much. And that's all for this Anarchast. Peace, love, and anarchy.